Snow fell like a thick curtain over the Rocky Mountains, burying paths and silencing the world. Inside his father's cabin, young Caleb Turner stoked the dying embers, listening to the storm's fury. The 17-year-old mountain boy knew solitude well, until a faint cry pierced the howling wind. Following his lantern's glow through blinding snow, he discovered her, a woman collapsed by the creek, nearly frozen, clutching a mysterious bag. "Come inside now," he whispered, carrying her to safety. As Elena recovered, warmth returned to more than just her body, but the storm concealed dangerous truths. Why was she really on that stagecoach? What secret was she protecting that men would kill to possess? Before the mountain thaws, blood might stain the snow. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered weakly through frost-coated windows as Caleb stoked the cabin's fire. 3 logs should last until noon, he calculated. Winter had arrived early this year, harsher than the 5 before it. Not that he minded the solitude. After 3 years alone on this mountain, silence had become his most faithful companion. He traced his fingers over the wooden bear on the mantel. "Patience in carving, patience in living," his father would say, guiding his young hands over pine with a pocket-knife worn smooth from decades of use. Samuel Turner had been a man of few words but endless wisdom about surviving these mountains. Caleb moved to the kitchen, a generous term for the corner housing a cast-iron stove and handmade pine cupboards. Breakfast was simple. Coffee boiled thick enough to stand a spoon in, venison jerky from last fall's hunt, and the last of September's preserved berries. Through the window, he watched snow build against the woodshed. 3 feet already, with more clouds gathering above the ridge. The radio crackled with static before a voice broke through. "Heavy storm warning remains in effect for Elkhorn County. Expect an additional 18 to 24 inches over the next 48 hours. Travel inadvisable on all mountain passes," Caleb grunted. "Travel inadvisable," as if anyone from town ventured this far up Widow's Ridge in winter. The nearest neighbor was 12 miles down the Switchback Trail, and Old Man Jenkins likely hadn't emerged from his cabin since October. At 34, Caleb felt decades older. His reflection in the wash basin showed a face weathered beyond its years, beard shot with early gray, eyes that had seen too many harsh seasons. Folks in Riverdale called him strange when he made his twice-yearly trips for supplies. "The mountain hermit," they whispered. "The boy who never came down after his daddy died." They weren't entirely wrong. After his father's passing, Caleb had considered returning to what passed for civilization. But the thought of crowded streets and endless chatter made his skin crawl. Here, every sound had meaning. Every silence told a story. Timber whined at the door, his shaggy form rising from the bearskin rug. The German Shepherd Mix had appeared on his porch as a half-starved pup the winter after his father died, as if sent to ensure Caleb wouldn't face the mountains entirely alone. "All right, boy. Quick one today?" Caleb pulled on his father's old sheepskin coat, worn at the elbows, but still the warmest thing he owned. Outside, the cold hit like a physical blow. He exhaled, watching his breath crystallize before being whipped away by wind. Timber bounded through snowdrifts that reached his chest, seemingly immune to the cold beneath his thick coat. The routine never varied. Check the perimeter. Ensure the woodpile remained covered. Examine the smokehouse where venison and elk hung in various stages of curing. Each action performed with practiced efficiency, learned through his father's patient instruction and his own hard lessons. The snares were empty today. Nothing moved in storms like this, not rabbit, fox, nor deer. They were all hunkered down, waiting it out just like him. Timber suddenly stopped, ears pricked toward the valley. "What is it, boy?" The dog growled low, a sound Caleb rarely heard, except when wolves ventured too close to the cabin. But this wasn't wolf season. They'd be denned up miles north near the limestone caves. Then he heard it, faint but unmistakable beneath the storm's howl. A cry, human impossible. No one would be fool enough to be on the mountain in this weather. Timber barked sharply, trotting toward the sound before looking back expectantly. Caleb hesitated. The storm was worsening by the minute, visibility dropping to mere yards. Following a phantom sound could mean death if he lost sight of the cabin. "Come on, Timber, inside!" The dog whined, but obeyed, casting a final glance toward the valley. Back inside, Caleb hung his coat and added another log to the fire. But Timber remained restless, pacing between Caleb and the door, whining with increasing urgency. The sound came again, louder now. Definitely human. Definitely in trouble. Caleb remembered his father's firmest rule: we don't turn away from those in need on this mountain. Nature's harsh enough without humans being the same. With a deep sigh that fogged the window, he reached for his coat again, and the old kerosene lantern that had guided his father through 50 mountain winters. Whoever was out there wouldn't survive another hour in the building storm. "Looks like we've got company coming, Timber," he muttered, checking his knife and slipping a flare into his pocket. "Let's go be neighborly." The wind sliced through Caleb's layers as if they were paper. Snow pellets stung his exposed skin, while Timber forged ahead, nose down, tracking the faint cries that grew more sporadic with each passing minute. "Hello?" Caleb called, voice swallowed by the howling gale. "Anyone out there?" No response came except the wind's mournful reply. The rational part of his mind, the part his father had carefully cultivated, urged him to turn back. Even with the lantern, visibility extended barely 10 feet ahead. One wrong turn and he could lose sight of his own tracks. Many mountain men had frozen to death within yards of their own cabins, disoriented by whiteouts just like this one, but Timber pressed forward with determination. Descending toward Crow Creek, where summer fishing holes now lay beneath ice and snow. Caleb followed, trusting the dog's senses more than his own. The creek appeared suddenly, a dark gash in the white landscape, and there, collapsed beside a lightning-struck pine, lay a form nearly buried in drifting snow. A woman. Caleb knelt beside her, brushing snow from a face blue-tinged with cold. Dark hair, frosted white, clung to pale cheeks. City clothes, entirely unsuitable for mountain winters, were soaked through. One hand clutched a leather satchel pressed against her chest, fingers locked around the strap, despite her unconscious state. "Ma'am?" Caleb touched her neck, found a pulse, weak but present. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. A soft moan escaped lips already showing early signs of frostbite. No time for questions. She'd die within the hour without shelter and warmth. Caleb set down his lantern and unwound the faded blue scarf from his neck, his mother's only gift to him before she died, bringing him into the world. He wrapped it around the woman's exposed neck and lower face, tucking the ends inside her inadequate coat. "I'm going to carry you," he explained, though she gave no indication of hearing. "My cabin's not far. You'll be safe there." He lifted her, surprised by her lightness. The satchel remained clutched in her grip, and he made no attempt to remove it. Whatever it contained clearly mattered enough for her to maintain hold, even in unconsciousness. Timber led the way back, their progress slowed by Caleb's careful steps with his burden. The woman stirred occasionally, murmuring words he couldn't catch above the wind. Once her eyes opened briefly, dark, disoriented, fearful, before closing again. Almost there, he assured her, though the cabin remained invisible through the thickening snow. When the lantern's light finally caught the frost-covered window panes of his cabin, Caleb felt relief wash through him. They'd made it. Timber bounded ahead, scratching at the door with impatient paws. Inside, warmth embraced them like a physical entity. Caleb laid the woman gently on his bed, the only proper one in the cabin, and stoked the fire, until flames leapt high enough to cast dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Only then did he take proper stock of his unexpected guest. Young, mid-20s perhaps. Her clothes spoke of city life, a wool coat too light for mountain weather, leather boots fashionable rather than functional, store-bought gloves with decorative stitching instead of proper insulation. What was someone like her doing on Widow's Ridge in the dead of winter? Caleb's isolation had made him cautious of strangers, but his father's teachings ran deeper. "Judge a man by his actions, not your suspicions," Samuel Turner would say. This woman needed help, regardless of her story. He pulled off her wet boots and socks, grimacing at toes white with early frostbite. The coat followed, then her outer layers, all while averting his eyes as much as possible, maintaining what dignity he could offer her in such circumstances. His mother's quilt, saved for the coldest nights, came next, wrapped around her still form. The satchel remained clasped in her grip, even as he worked. Whatever it contained, she wasn't letting go without a fight. As he heated water for tea, Caleb considered his next steps. The storm showed no signs of abating. They'd be trapped here, two strangers, for days at minimum. His gaze fell on his father's rifle mounted above the fireplace, always loaded, always ready. Trust, his father had taught him, was earned slowly and lost quickly, especially in the mountains, where mistakes rarely offered second chances. The woman moaned softly, turning her head toward the fire's warmth. The blue scarf, his mother's scarf, remained around her neck, a spot of color against the pallor of her skin. "Come inside now," he whispered, echoing his earlier words. "You're safe here." But even as he said it, Caleb wondered if it were true. Dawn arrived without sunshine, the storm undiminished. Caleb hadn't slept, spending the night alternating between tending the fire and checking on his unexpected guest. Her breathing had steadied, color gradually returning to her face. But she remained caught in feverish dreams, muttering names and fragments of sentences he couldn't piece together. "No, please, the papers." Her fingers clutched the satchel even in sleep. Knuckles white with determination, Timber lay beside the bed, head on paws, watching the woman with unusual attentiveness. The dog normally kept a wary distance from strangers, but something about her had earned his protection. Caleb opened the old tin box his grandmother had used for her remedies, one of the few possessions his father had salvaged before moving to the mountain. Inside, carefully dried herbs filled small cloth pouches, each labeled in his grandmother's faded handwriting. He selected yarrow for fever and willow bark for pain, adding a pinch of mint for palatability. As he steeped the mixture, the cabin filled with a sharp, medicinal aroma. His father had insisted he learn the mountain's plants and their uses. "Doctors are fine for townfolk," Samuel would say, "but up here, nature provides what we need if we know where to look." The woman stirred, eyes fluttering open as Caleb approached with the steaming cup. For a moment she stared blankly at the rough timbered ceiling. Then panic flooded her expression. She bolted upright, immediately clutching her head with a groan. "Easy now," Caleb said, keeping his distance. "You're safe." Her eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the rustic furniture, mounted antlers, and fire crackling in the stone hearth. Finally they settled on Caleb, suspicious, calculating. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse but cultured, confirming she was indeed from the city. "Caleb Turner." "This is my cabin. Don't you have frozen by Crow Creek?" He gestured to the window, where snow continued its relentless descent. "Brought you here before the storm took you." She pulled the quilt tighter, suddenly aware of her state of undress beneath it. "My clothes hanging by the fire. They were soaked through. Had to get you dry." He looked away, hoping she understood the necessity rather than impropriety. "There's a shirt of mine there if you need it." Her free hand, the one not clutching the satchel, touched the blue scarf still around her neck. "Thank you," Caleb nodded, offering the cup. "Herb tea. Help with the fever and pain." She hesitated before accepting it, sniffing cautiously before taking a small sip. "I'm Elena," she offered, apparently deciding he wasn't an immediate threat. "What brings you to Widow's Ridge in winter, Elena?" "Not exactly tourist season." The question tightened her posture. "Traveling." "Got separated from my group." "Some group, leaving you behind in a blizzard." Her eyes flashed defensively. "It wasn't their fault. The stagecoach had trouble on the pass. I went for help and got turned around in the snow." Stagecoach. Few still ran through these mountains, mostly for tourists wanting an authentic frontier experience in summer months. None operated in winter. Stagecoach would have been forced to wait out the storm at Wagner's Station, 20 miles south, Caleb said, watching her reaction. They'd have a radio, emergency supplies. Eleanor sipped the tea, using the moment to compose herself. I'm not familiar with the area. Clearly, how long until the storm passes? She asked, changing the subject. Radio says 2 days, maybe 3. But the trails will be impassable for at least a week after that. He stoked the fire, adding another log. You're stuck here for a while, I'm afraid. Something like panic flickered across her face. A week? That's not. I need to reach Riverdale as soon as possible. Riverdale's 40 miles northwest, on the side of the mountain range, but there must be some way, not unless you want to die trying. Caleb's bluntness seemed to startle her. Even with proper gear and knowledge of these mountains, winter crossings are foolish. Without them, it's suicide. Elena fell silent, fingers absently tracing the outline of something inside her satchel. I see, Timber whined softly, nudging her hand with his nose. Surprisingly, she relaxed enough to scratch behind his ears, earning a contented grumble from the normally standoffish dog. He likes you, Caleb observed. That's rare. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I've always gotten along with dogs better than people. The smile vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Mr. Turner, Caleb, I appreciate your help, truly, but I need to know if anyone else knows I'm here. The question confirmed his suspicions. She wasn't running towards something in Riverdale. She was running from something or someone. Just me and Timber, he answered carefully. Nearest neighbors 12 miles downslope. No phone lines up here. Just the radio for weather reports and emergencies. Relief softened her features. Good. That's good. Caleb added nothing more, but the implication hung in the air between them. She wasn't telling the truth, at least not all of it, and whatever had driven her to the mountains in winter was serious enough that isolation, normally a hardship, came as a comfort. Outside, the wind howled its warning against the window panes. Inside, an equally potent storm was brewing. 3 days passed in the strange rhythm that develops between strangers forced into close quarters. Elena grew stronger, the frostbite on her toes and fingers responding well to Caleb's careful treatments of warm water and herbal salves. She wore his clothes, rolled at sleeves and cuffs, cinched with rope at the waist, and kept to herself when possible in the small cabin, always. The satchel remained within her reach. Morning of the 4th day, Caleb woke before dawn as usual, added wood to the overnight embers, and turned on the radio for the weather report. The ancient device, his father had claimed it came from a WW surplus sale, crackled to life reluctantly. Continuing our coverage of the stagecoach incident near Widow's Ridge, the Crestview Heritage, Tours vehicle, reported missing 3 days ago, was discovered yesterday by search and rescue personnel. According to Sheriff McPherson, evidence at the scene indicates robbery was the motive. Caleb glanced toward Elena, still sleeping on his bed, then lowered the volume slightly. The driver was found deceased at the scene with gunshot wounds. 2 passengers have been identified among the victims, with a 3rd passenger, Ms. Elena Costello, still unaccounted for. Sheriff McPherson stated that Miss Costello may have vital information about the perpetrators. Caleb's hand froze on the dial. Elena Costello. His guest had a last name now, and apparently significance to a criminal investigation. Anyone with information regarding Ms. Costello's whereabouts is urged to contact the sheriff's office immediately. In related news, the winter storm that hampered initial search efforts is expected to diminish by tomorrow evening, allowing expanded search operations in the affected areas. The broadcaster moved on to other news, but Caleb remained motionless, processing the implications. Elena hadn't been entirely forthcoming about the stagecoach, but he hadn't expected robbery and murder. Was she a witness, a victim who escaped, or something else entirely? How long have you known? Elena's voice startled him. She stood in the bedroom doorway, his too large flannel shirt hanging from her slight frame. Dark circles underlined eyes that held no trace of sleep's confusion. She'd been awake, listening. Just now, Caleb answered truthfully, gesturing to the radio. Said your name. Said there was a robbery. Her shoulders sagged slightly. They called it a robbery, wasn't it? That's complicated. She moved to the window, peering out at the lightening sky where snow still fell, but with less ferocity than previous days. The storm's weakening. Should clear by tomorrow evening, according to the report. Elena nodded, seemingly to herself. Then they'll come searching. Sheriff's men. A bitter smile twisted her lips. Sheriff McPherson most of all. Caleb let silence stretch between them, stoking the fire with deliberate movements. Experience had taught him that quiet often drew out words where questions failed. I wasn't supposed to be on that stagecoach, Elena finally said. Last-minute change of plans. No one knew I was taking it except... She shook her head. It doesn't matter now. 3 people dead matters, Caleb counted, his voice level. Sheriff looking for you matters. Not just to them, to me. This is my home you've brought trouble to. Something hardened in her expression. I didn't ask you to rescue me. No, but here we are. He gestured to the space between them. Truth might help us both. Elena studied him, calculation visible behind her eyes. Finally, she retrieved her satchel and withdrew a manila folder. I'm a legal secretary at Hargrove, Webster & Sons in Denver. 3 weeks ago, I was organizing files for a property dispute case when I found these misfiled in our records room. She handed Caleb several documents, land deeds, bank transfers, correspondence on official letterhead. His reading was functional rather than fluent, but even he recognized the substantial sums involved. County Judge Blackwood and Sheriff McPherson have been orchestrating land grabs throughout the county, Elena explained. They identify vulnerable properties, manufacture tax disputes, force sales at pennies on the dollar, then resell to mining and logging companies for massive profits. Caleb frowned. These mountains have mining claims dating back generations. Exactly. Many owned by families who've moved away but keep paying taxes. Or elderly owners struggling with paperwork. Elena's voice grew passionate. They've stolen nearly 30 properties in the last 5 years. Millions of dollars diverted through shell companies. And you have proof, enough to start an investigation. She tapped the folder. I was taking these to the federal prosecutor in Riverdale. The pieces aligned with uncomfortable clarity. And the stagecoach robbery? No robbery! An execution. Her voice cracked slightly. They must have discovered the documents were missing. The stagecoach was stopped by men in uniform. Sheriff's uniforms. I hid under a seat when I recognized McPherson's voice. When the shooting started, she wrapped her arms around herself. I ran. Just ran through the woods until I couldn't hear the gunshots anymore. Caleb absorbed this, thinking of the radio announcement. If Elena was telling the truth, the same sheriff investigating the robbery had orchestrated it and would be leading the search once the storm cleared. These mountains are my home, Caleb said quietly. Nobody has the right to steal them. Something shifted in Elena's eyes, relief perhaps at being believed, or simply the comfort of sharing her burden. In the corner, the radio crackled with static, as if emphasizing the thin connection to a world that suddenly seemed much closer than it had in years. Someone's been here, Caleb said, returning from his morning perimeter check. He stomped snow from his boots and placed a single brass shell casing on the table. Found this by the north woodpile. Elena paled, reaching instinctively for her satchel. How the storm hasn't fully cleared yet, but visibility improved overnight. Determined men could manage the lower trails now. Caleb examined the casing. Hunting rifle, 30-06. Standard issue for the county sheriff's department. How do you know that? My father was deputy sheriff before moving up here, back when the badge meant something. He pocketed the casing. Tracks suggest just one man, probably scouting. Snowfall covered most of them, but they're fresh, last 12 hours. Elena's hands trembled slightly. They know I'm here. Not necessarily. They're checking all cabins and shelters. Standard search procedure, but they'll be back, Caleb nodded grimly. With more men once they report finding signs of occupation. 5 days of close quarters had worn down initial barriers between them. Elena had shared more details about the corruption she'd uncovered. Judge and sheriff working with developers to steal land from vulnerable owners using falsified tax records and environmental violations. Nearly 30 families had lost generational properties. How far to the nearest safe cabin? Elena asked, already gathering her few possessions. There's an old line shack about 8 miles south. Former Firewatchers station. Caleb pulled out his father's map, pointing to a small square marked in faded ink, stocked with emergency supplies. Nobody knows about it except Forest Service veterans. Could we reach it today? If we leave within the hour. Storm's abating, but the snow's deep. Slow going. Elena nodded, determination replacing fear. I've caused you enough trouble already. I can try to make it alone if you... Not happening. Caleb's tone left no room for argument. These mountains kill the unprepared. Besides, he checked his rifle, sliding cartridges into the chamber with practiced efficiency. This isn't just about you anymore. Elena paused. What do you mean? Caleb tapped the map where his cabin stood. Turner property. Been in my family 3 generations. According to those documents you're carrying, it's on their acquisition list. Understanding dawned in her eyes. The missing owner provision. Properties where taxes are paid, but owners haven't been physically present in county records for 5 years. My father handled all official business in town before he died. I rarely go down. Might look abandoned on paper, but that's illegal. You clearly live here. Law only matters when those enforcing it have integrity. Caleb checked his watch, his father's old timepiece, still keeping perfect rhythm. Pack only essentials. Food, water, 1 change of clothes. Anything that can identify you stays behind. While Elena gathered her things, Caleb prepared for their departure with the efficiency of a man accustomed to emergencies. Extra ammunition in one pocket, fire-starting materials in another, dried meat, hard cheese, and flatbread wrapped in oilskin. First aid supplies. The small tin of essential herbs. He considered what must be left behind, generations of family possessions, books, tools, memories embedded in every handcrafted piece of furniture. If McPherson's men came while they were gone, they might burn it all to eliminate evidence of Elena's presence. The thought hardened his resolve. This cabin represented his heritage, his father's legacy. He would not surrender it to corrupt officials without a fight. Ready, Elena announced, wearing the warmest clothes he could provide. His mother's old coat found in a trunk, wool socks layered inside oversized boots, the blue scarf still around her neck. Caleb gave Timber final instructions in the form of hand signals his father had taught him years ago. The dog would remain behind, hidden in the root cellar. If strangers came, he would stay silent. After 3 days, if Caleb hadn't returned, the dog would be released by a simple mechanism to seek his own survival. One last thing, Caleb said, removing a floorboard beneath his bed. From the hiding space, he retrieved a small revolver. My father's backup piece. Know how to use it? Elena took the gun with surprising familiarity. My father taught me. Before he died, Caleb nodded, oddly reassured. We stay together. Move quietly. Follow my lead. He glanced out the window at the brightening sky. Storm's window is closing. We need to be hidden before they have clear visibility. As they slipped out the back door into the snow-muffled forest, Caleb took one last look at the cabin, the only home he'd ever known. Whether he'd see it again depended on outmaneuvering men who knew these mountains almost as well as he did. But they didn't know his father's secret trails. And they didn't have the motivation of a man protecting not just his life, but his entire heritage. They moved through the forest like shadows, following a route invisible to untrained eyes. 3 hours into their journey, the only sounds were the crunch of snow beneath their boots and their controlled breathing clouding the air. How much farther? Eleanor whispered, her face flushed from exertion. Caleb paused, studying a seemingly ordinary pine. To most, it appeared indistinguishable from thousands of others dotting the mountainside. But his fingers found the small notch carved into the bark, 3 diagonal cuts resembling a bird's foot. "About 4 miles, he answered, voice equally low. "We've been following my father's markers, old hunting trails, not on any official maps. Your father planned for this kind of situation." A hint of a smile crossed Caleb's weathered face. "Not exactly. He was a cautious man, private. After leaving the sheriff's department, he wanted ways to move through these mountains without being tracked. They continued onward, Caleb occasionally adjusting their course after spotting markers only he could recognize. A certain arrangement of stacked stones, a branch bent in a particular direction, cuts in bark that mimicked natural damage but formed patterns to the informed eye. "Stop!" Caleb suddenly raised his hand. Elena froze mid-step. He pointed to a ridge approximately half a mile east, where 3 tiny figures moved against the snow. Even at this distance, the uniforms were unmistakable. "Sheriff's men," Elena breathed, instinctively crouching lower. Caleb pulled her behind a large spruce. "They're working a grid search pattern. Moving north to south. Will they cross our path? Not if we keep to these trails. They'll follow established routes." He studied the search party's movement. "They're being thorough, organized. McPherson isn't taking chances." They remained motionless until the distant figures disappeared behind a ridge. Only then did Caleb signal to continue, now moving with even greater caution. As they traveled, the landscape grew more rugged. What had been gentle slopes near Caleb's cabin became steep ravines and narrow passages between towering rock formations. The perfect terrain for ambush or evasion. "My legs feel like lead," Elena admitted during a brief water break. Despite her exhaustion, she had maintained their pace without complaint. "Not used to mountain hiking. You're doing well," Caleb said, offering her jerky from his pack. "Eat, need the energy," she accepted gratefully. "How often did you and your father travel these paths?" "Every season. He'd point out the markers, make me memorize them. Said someday I might need to find my way when he couldn't guide me. He sounds like a good father. The best." Caleb's voice carried the weight of memory. "Taught me everything worth knowing." As they ate, Elena studied him with newfound curiosity. "Why did he leave the sheriff's department?" "If you don't mind my asking." Caleb was silent so long, Elena thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he secured his pack and stood. McPherson joined the force. "My father saw what kind of man he was. The corruption started small, overlooking violations for friends, pressuring businesses for favors. Dad refused to participate." His expression darkened. "When he threatened to report it, there was an accident during a patrol. Nearly killed him. I'm sorry. Instead of fighting, he retreated. Brought me up here, away from people like McPherson." Caleb checked their surroundings before continuing. "Now I understand he wasn't running away. He was protecting what mattered most." They resumed their journey, the path growing steeper. Elena struggled occasionally, but accepted Caleb's offered hand without comment. Their partnership had evolved naturally, no longer reluctant strangers, but allies bound by common purpose. Late afternoon brought them to a small plateau overlooking a steep valley. The tree line thinned, offering a panoramic view of the mountain range stretching toward the horizon. "There." Caleb pointed to a barely visible structure nestled against a cliff face, partially obscured by pines. "The Line Shack. We'll reach it before dusk." Elena squinted. "I would have walked right past it." "That's the idea. Forest Service built it to blend in. Emergency shelter, not comfort." As they began their final descent, Caleb spotted another carved marker, this one different from the others. A simple X cut deep into an ancient pine. "My father's addition," he explained, touching the mark reverently. "Means we're entering a safe place." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. In these mountains, safety had become a relative term. But as the Line Shack grew closer, Caleb felt a familiar certainty replacing the day's tension. His father's wisdom continued to guide them, encoded in secret symbols, overlooked by those who saw the forest only as a resource to be exploited. "Your father," Elena said quietly, "would be proud of you today." Caleb didn't respond, but his steps grew more purposeful as they approached the haven. His father had helped secure one more gift from a man who'd prepared his son for a world more dangerous than either had imagined. The line shack was smaller than it had appeared from a distance, a single room built of rough-hewn logs, darkened by decades of weather. A metal stovepipe jutted from its sloped roof, now partially collapsed on one side. Nature had begun the slow process of reclamation, with moss growing between logs and small saplings pushing up against the foundation. Not exactly the Ritz-Carlton, Elena remarked as Caleb worked the frozen padlock. Better than freezing outside. The lock finally yielded, its rusted mechanism protesting after years of disuse. Inside, dust motes swirled in the fading light that penetrated the single window. The cabin's contents remained largely as they had been left years ago when the Forest Service abandoned this outpost. A cast-iron stove, wooden shelves stocked with dented cans and emergency supplies, a narrow cot, a small desk, and 2 chairs, all draped in cobwebs. Caleb immediately set to work, checking the stovepipe for blockages before lighting a fire with practiced efficiency. Elena explored their sanctuary, brushing away decades of dust. "Look at this," she called, picking up a tarnished badge from the desk drawer. "Forest Service? National protectors before your sheriff's department decided to sell off what they should be guarding." Caleb took the badge, turning it over in his palm. "My father knew the ranger stationed here, Marcus Williams. Good man. Fought against the first wave of questionable development permits 20 years ago. What happened to him? Reassigned suddenly. Dad always suspected he was pushed out for being too thorough in his environmental impact reviews." Caleb placed the badge respectfully on the desk. "These mountains have a history of losing their defenders." As warmth gradually filled the small space, they took inventory of their resources. The canned goods were questionable after years of temperature fluctuations, but the dried supplies remained viable. A cache of emergency equipment yielded several useful items: waterproof matches, first aid supplies, an oil lamp, and extra blankets that smelled strongly of mothballs, but remained intact. "We should be safe here for a day or two," Caleb said, heating water for tea on the now functional stove. "The storm's completely passed. They'll have clear conditions for searching." Elena placed her precious satchel on the desk, removing the documents to review them in the lamplight. "According to these records, McPherson and Judge Blackwood have targeted 3 more properties for acquisition this month." She spread out a map marked with circled locations. "Including your cabin." Caleb studied the map, jaw tightening. "They've been methodical, starting with the most remote properties, moving inward. Less chance of resistance that way. By the time people realized what was happening, a pattern was established and the judge had legal precedents to cite." Elena organized the papers with the precision of someone accustomed to managing legal documents. "Classic predatory technique. How far to Riverdale from here?" 25 miles northwest as the crow flies. Longer by trail." Elena's shoulders slumped slightly. "Too far to risk without preparation. And McPherson's men between us and there." Caleb poured the tea into tin cups. "We need a plan beyond just running." They sat in thoughtful silence, the small stove popping occasionally as it consumed decades-old wood from the stack beside it. Outside, darkness settled over the mountains, bringing the particular silence that accompanies heavy snow. "The prosecutor I was trying to reach," Elena finally said. "Frank Donovan. He's been investigating corruption in several counties. These documents would give him enough to move against McPherson and Blackwood. Can he be trusted?" "He prosecuted his own brother-in-law for similar schemes last year. Got him 15 years. She sipped her tea. "But reaching him is the challenge." Caleb moved to the window, peering out at the moonlit landscape. No lights, no movement. For now, they remained alone on this section of the mountain. "There's a hunting cabin about 10 miles from here," he said thoughtfully. "Belongs to Henry Jenkins. Has a radio powerful enough to reach Riverdale. The neighbor you mentioned, former state police, retired 15 years ago. No love for McPherson." Caleb turned back to Elena. "If we can reach Jenkins, we might be able to contact your prosecutor without walking into an ambush." Hope flickered across Elena's tired features. "You think he'd help us?" Hard to say. He's a private man. Doesn't involve himself in county matters anymore. Caleb returned to his seat. But he respects the law, the real law. And he respected my father. Eleanor gathered the documents, carefully returning them to her satchel. It's worth trying. What's our best route? Caleb sketched a rough map on the dusty desktop. We follow Cottonwood Creek north for 7 miles, then cut west through Morgan's Pass. Difficult terrain, but unlikely to be watched. How soon can we leave? First light. We'll need the full day to make it before dark. Caleb added another log to the stove. Get some rest. Tomorrow will test us both. As Elena settled onto the cot, Caleb remained at the window, the tarnished Forest Service badge in his palm. The mountains looked peaceful under moonlight, betraying no hint of the men who now hunted them. Men who had perverted their badge's meaning from protection to predation. His thumb traced the worn motto on the badge, caring for the land and serving people. Some oaths, it seemed, endured longer than others. Dawn arrived with knife-edge clarity, the sky a perfect azure above snow-laden pines. Caleb woke instantly, a lifetime of mountain mornings, having trained him to transition from sleep to alertness without the groggy intermission most people required. Elena still slept on the narrow cot, her breathing deep and even. While preparing a simple breakfast from their supplies, Caleb noticed a small metal box wedged behind the stove. Inside lay several forgotten items: matches, pencil stubs, a folding knife with a broken tip, and a water-damaged photograph. 4 men in Forest Service uniforms stood before this very cabin, arms around each other's shoulders, faces young and earnest beneath their uniform hats. Caleb recognized his father immediately, Samuel Turner, perhaps 30 years old, his beard still more brown than gray, eyes crinkling at the corners, with the same smile Caleb sometimes caught in his own reflection. Beside him stood Marcus Williams, the ranger whose badge they'd found yesterday. On his father's other side was a younger Henry Jenkins, already displaying the ramrod-straight posture of his military background. But it was the 4th man who caused Caleb's breath to catch. A youthful, grinning McPherson, looking nothing like the hard-eyed sheriff who now hunted them. Before ambition and greed had twisted his path. Who are they? Caleb hadn't heard Elena approach. He handed her the photograph without comment, busying himself with the breakfast preparations as she studied it. Is that, my father, Jenkins, the ranger who was stationed here? Caleb poured hot water over coffee grounds. And McPherson? Elena looked up sharply. McPherson was Forest Service? Before joining the sheriff's department. This would be 25 years ago. Caleb's expression remained carefully neutral. My father never spoke about their time together. Elena studied the image more closely. They look like friends. Things change. People change. She returned the photograph to its box. Not always for the better. They ate quickly, aware that daylight was both necessary for their journey and dangerous for the visibility it provided to those searching for them. Elena had proven herself a fast learner, packing her small share of supplies with newfound efficiency. We follow the creek, she confirmed. Tucking the last of the documents into her satchel, Caleb nodded, checking the loads in his rifle. Water always finds the path of least resistance. Good guide in mountain terrain. Unless you're trying to avoid pursuers who know the same principle. He acknowledged her point with a grim smile. That's why we only follow it for the first 7 miles. Then we go where they won't expect, over the ridge through Morgan's Pass. You sound like you've done this before. Evading search parties? No, but my father made sure I knew how to disappear in these mountains if necessary. Caleb secured his pack. Never thought I'd need those lessons. They left the line shack as they'd found it, erasing evidence of their presence, a habit Caleb's father had instilled in him from childhood. The mountains keep your secrets if you respect them, he'd often said. The morning hike along Cottonwood Creek proceeded smoothly. The passing storm had left the world crystalline and hushed, snow dampening every sound except the gentle gurgle of water beneath partial ice. They moved steadily, Caleb setting a pace challenging enough for progress, but sustainable for Elena's city-conditioned stamina. "Tell me about Jenkins," she said during a brief rest, her breath clouding before her. "Will he really help us?" Caleb considered the question. "Jenkins follows his own code, strict but fair. Doesn't involve himself with county politics since retiring, but he was my father's closest friend up here. But you're not certain." "Can't be. I haven't spoken to him in nearly 2 years." Elena absorbed this. "What if he turns us away? Then we reassess. Find another way to reach your prosecutor." Caleb checked the position of the sun. "Jenkins isn't our only option, just our best one." They continued onward, the creek gradually narrowing as they gained elevation. By midday, they'd covered nearly 5 miles. Good progress considering the terrain hold. Caleb suddenly raised his hand, dropping into a crouch. Elena froze, following his gaze to a ridge approximately half a mile east. Nothing moved among the trees. "What is it?" she whispered. "Reflection. Sunlight on glass. Binoculars or a scope." For several tense minutes, they remained motionless behind a fallen log, Caleb's eyes never leaving the distant ridge. Finally, he detected movement. 2 figures traversing the ridgeline heading north. Search party. "They haven't spotted us yet. Should we turn back?" Caleb shook his head. "They're moving away from Jenkins' place. This might work to our advantage. Draw resources in the wrong direction." Eleanor's shoulders tensed as she processed the implications. "They're between us and your cabin now. We couldn't return even if we wanted to. Forward is our only option." Caleb helped her to her feet. "We need to reach the pass before nightfall." As they resumed their journey with heightened caution, Caleb found himself thinking of the photograph. 4 young men united in purpose before life's complexities pulled them in different directions. One had become a corrupt official, another forced into isolation, the third reassigned for his integrity, and his father, who had chosen these mountains as his refuge and his legacy, never suspecting they would become the battleground for everything he valued. Morgan's Pass lived up to its reputation. The narrow trail wound between sheer rock faces, forcing them to proceed single file through sections barely wide enough for a person wearing a backpack. Wind howled through the natural wind tunnel, carrying occasional flurries of loose snow that stung exposed skin. How much farther? Elena called over the wind, her voice nearly lost in the constant roar. 2 miles through the pass. "Then 3 to Jenkins' cabin," Caleb replied, extending a hand to help her over a particularly treacherous section where ice had formed a glassy sheet across the path. The terrain had slowed their progress considerably. What should have been a day's journey was stretching into evening with miles still ahead. The winter sun already hung low, shadows lengthening across the snow. "We need to find shelter soon," Caleb said, surveying the darkening sky. "Night travel through unfamiliar sections would be foolish." Elena nodded, too focused on maintaining her footing to argue. The city clothes she'd worn when Caleb found her seemed from another lifetime, now wrapped in layers of borrowed garments. Face wind-burned and hands calloused from the journey, she moved with the determined rhythm of someone adapting to mountain survival. They emerged from the narrowest section of the pass to a small plateau that offered momentary respite from the wind. Caleb immediately tensed, raising his hand for silence. Elena froze, following his gaze to a disturbed area in the snow ahead. "Someone's been here," he whispered. "Recently." The remnants of a small campfire smoldered beneath a rocky overhang, wisps of smoke still rising from embers not completely extinguished. Beside it, footprints led in multiple directions, some heading further along the path they intended to take. Caleb approached cautiously, rifle ready. The site had been abandoned within the hour. Coffee in a tin cup remained warm enough to melt the snowflakes falling into it. A half-eaten protein bar lay discarded nearby. "Sheriff's men?" Elena asked, maintaining distance as Caleb had taught her. "Likely." He examined the prints. 3 men. 2 continued west toward Jenkins. One headed back east. As he surveyed the site, a partially burned paper caught his attention. Retrieving it from the fire's edge, Caleb found himself looking at a hand-drawn map of the surrounding area. Red X's marked locations already searched. Lines divided the mountain into grid sections. A circle encompassed Jenkins' cabin with the notation, "Check again, priority." "They're searching systematically," Caleb said, showing Elena the map. "And they've already visited Jenkins." Her face paled. "Does that mean they found him? Questioned him?" "Can't say. But they're heading back there now. Why return if they've already searched it?" Caleb studied the map more carefully. New information, perhaps, or his expression darkened. "They're using it as a base for this section of the search." The implications settled between them like a physical weight. Their best hope for contacting the outside world might now be the headquarters for those hunting them. "What do we do?" Elena asked, fatigue evident in her voice. Caleb folded the map and tucked it inside his coat. "We adjust. There's a hunting blind about a mile north of here. Not comfortable, but it'll provide shelter for the night. And tomorrow? We observe Jenkins' cabin, determine whether he's being held or if he's cooperating. Then decide." They abandoned the campsite, taking care to obscure their tracks as they diverted from their original path. The hunting dawn brought clarity and frost, the temperature having dropped significantly overnight. Caleb woke first, his body conditioned to rise with the light regardless of how little rest preceded it. Elena slept against his shoulder, her face relaxed in a way it never was during waking hours. He allowed himself a moment to observe her, not the frightened woman he'd found in the snow, nor the determined fugitive clutching incriminating documents, but simply Elena, unguarded. Then necessity intruded, and he gently shook her awake. "We need to move soon," he said as she oriented herself. "Check Jenkins' place before the search parties become active." They ate the last of their provisions, stale crackers and jerky, while Caleb outlined his plan. Jenkins' cabin lay approximately 2 miles northwest, situated on a rise that provided excellent visibility across the surrounding valley. "We approach from above, using the ridge for cover," he explained, tracing the route on their salvaged map. "Observe first. Determine if Jenkins is there, if he's alone, if he's being watched, and if McPherson's men are using it as a base. Then we retreat, find another way to contact your prosecutor." The morning hike proved easier than the previous day's journey, the terrain less severe as they descended through old-growth forest. But what they gained in easier terrain, they lost in caution. Every step now potentially monitored, every clearing a vulnerability. They paused at a stream to refill water bottles. As Caleb scanned their surroundings, movement caught his eye, a flash of dark clothing against snow, approximately 100 yards downslope. "Down," he whispered. Pulling Elena behind a fallen log, a single figure moved through the trees below, methodically sweeping the area. Unlike previous search parties, this one moved with military precision, stopping periodically to study the ground and surrounding forest. "Professional," Caleb murmured. "Not local deputies." The searcher continued his pattern, gradually working in their direction. Retreat would leave tracks too obvious to hide. Remaining in place risked discovery if the search pattern continued. "I need to create a diversion," Caleb decided, passing Elena his pack. "Work your way northwest, staying in dense cover. I'll meet you at the lightning-struck pine near the ridgeline." "Caleb, no arguments. I know these woods better than they do." Before she could protest further, he slipped away, moving silently through underbrush with the practiced ease of a lifetime spent hunting these mountains. Elena watched him disappear, then began her careful journey toward the rendezvous point. Caleb circled behind the searcher, studying his technique. The man moved like a professional tracker, not a deputy pressed into search duty. McPherson was escalating, bringing in outside resources. Concerning finding a suitable position, Caleb dislodged several heavy branches from a snow-laden pine, creating a cascade that sounded like movement through the forest. The searcher immediately turned toward the noise, his hand moving to his holster. What happened next unfolded with startling speed. The man's boot caught on a hidden root, sending him tumbling down a short embankment. His head struck a rock partially concealed by snow, the impact audible even at Caleb's distance. Then stillness. Caleb approached cautiously, rifle ready. The searcher lay unconscious, blood staining the snow beneath his head. still breathing but deeply unconscious. The fall had accomplished what Caleb had hoped to achieve through distraction. A thorough search of the man yielded concerning finds. A radio tuned to frequencies outside normal sheriff department channels, a military-grade sidearm, and most disturbingly, a pair of night vision goggles. Equipment far beyond standard law enforcement issue. "Who are you?" Caleb muttered, finding no identification beyond a small patch reading PCG Security on the man's jacket. Private contractors. McPherson had hired professional manhunters. Taking the radio and goggles, Caleb left the man in recovery position to prevent choking. The head wound didn't appear life-threatening, and mountain ethics, his father's ethics, forbade leaving even an adversary to die unnecessarily. He rejoined Elena at the rendezvous point, displaying his discoveries. "They've brought in professionals," he explained, showing her the night vision equipment. "This isn't standard sheriff's department gear." Elena examined the goggles. McPherson must be desperate. Using county funds for private security contractors crosses into clear illegality. More evidence for your prosecutor. "If we ever reach him, these men won't be bound by law enforcement restrictions," Elena noted, concern evident. "They're mercenaries, essentially, which makes reaching Jenkins even more crucial," Caleb agreed, pocketing the radio. "Professional trackers change the equation. We need comms, transportation, or both." They continued toward the ridge above Jenkins' property, now moving with redoubled caution. The discovery of professional manhunters elevated their situation from dangerous to potentially deadly. Men paid to find, not to uphold the law, would operate under different constraints than even corrupt deputies. As they crested the final rise, Jenkins' cabin came into view below. A sturdy two-story structure with a metal roof and wraparound porch. A thin line of smoke rose from the chimney. 3 vehicles were parked in the cleared area: Jenkins' old Ford truck, an unmarked SUV, and a sheriff's department cruiser. "Looks like we've found their command post," Caleb said grimly. They observed Jenkins' cabin for over an hour from their concealed position along the ridge. Activity below confirmed their fears. At least 5 men moved between vehicles and building with the coordinated efficiency of professionals. 2 wore sheriff's department uniforms, the others civilian clothes that couldn't hide their military bearing. "No sign of Jenkins himself," Caleb noted, lowering the binoculars borrowed from Elena's satchel. "Could be inside, could be elsewhere, or could be another victim," Elena said softly. Caleb's jaw tightened. Jenkins had been his father's friend, a gruff but honorable man who'd shared Christmas dinners with them for years. The thought of him suffering for that connection sent a cold anger through Caleb's veins. "We need to know if he's in there," Caleb decided, studying the property layout. "And we need that radio equipment." Elena followed his gaze to the small workshop behind the main cabin, a separate building where Jenkins had repaired everything from chainsaws to snowmobiles. A large antenna rose from its roof, likely connected to the powerful radio they sought. "Workshop's our target," Caleb continued. "Appears less guarded than the main house. If we wait until dark, use these." He patted the night vision goggles, taken from the unconscious searcher. "That's 12 hours away," Elena objected. "And the injured man will have been found by then." "Agreed. But rushing in daylight against professional opposition would be suicide." They retreated deeper into the tree line to formulate a plan. The confiscated radio occasionally crackled with coded communications, grid coordinates and status reports that confirmed the search's expanding scope. By mid-afternoon, a new development. 3 vehicles departed the cabin, leaving only 1 man visible on guard duty. The search was concentrating elsewhere, drawing resources away temporarily. "Now's our window," Caleb said, gathering their minimal equipment. 1 guard, possibly 2 inside. Better odds than we'll get later. They approached, using the natural contours of the land for cover, the lessons of Caleb's father guiding every step. When they reached the edge of the clearing, the sun hung low enough to cast long shadows across the snow, natural concealment for their final approach. "I'll create a distraction at the front," Caleb whispered. "You circle to the workshop. Get inside, barricade the door. I'll join you if possible. Elena gripped his arm. And if you can't? Then use whatever communication equipment you find. Contact your prosecutor. Get the evidence out. His expression softened momentarily. This was always the mission, Elena. The documents, not us. Before she could respond, Caleb moved away, circling toward the cabin's exposed side. Elena watched until he disappeared around the structure, then began her cautious approach toward the workshop. The distraction, when it came, was both effective and unexpected. A series of rapid gunshots, followed by the cabin's generator exploding in a shower of sparks and smoke. The guard ran toward the commotion, weapon drawn, attention fully diverted. Elena slipped into the workshop undetected. Inside, tools lined the walls in methodical organization. A workbench dominated the center, various mechanical projects in different stages of completion scattered across its surface. At the far end sat an old ham radio setup, their target. She had just reached the equipment when the door opened behind her. Spinning around, Eleanor raised the small revolver Caleb had given her days earlier. "I wouldn't," said a gravelly voice. "Never did like guns pointed at me in my own shop." An elderly man with a white beard and piercing blue eyes regarded her steadily, his own rifle held casually but competently. "Mr. Jenkins?" Elena lowered her weapon slightly. "Depends who's asking." His gaze narrowed. "You're the woman they're hunting." "The one from the stagecoach. Yes, Save it." Jenkins closed the door behind him. "Where's Samuel's boy?" "Creating a distraction. We need to contact a federal prosecutor in Riverdale. Lives depend on it, including Caleb's." Something shifted in the old man's expression at the mention of Caleb. "McPherson's boys have been using my place as a command post, keeping me under house arrest. For my protection, they claim." He moved to the workbench, shifting aside a tarpaulin to reveal an ancient brass telegraph key mounted on a wooden base. "Radio's been disabled. They're not fools." "But they don't know about this." Jenkins patted the Morse code key with something like affection. "Old emergency backup system from my state police days. Runs on separate power, connects to a receiver at the regional office. Still functional last I checked." Elena stared at the antiquated equipment. "You can send messages with this?" "Those who remember how." Jenkins' weathered fingers positioned themselves over the key. "Fortunately, some skills stay with you. Who exactly needs reaching?" "Federal Prosecutor Frank Donovan in Riverdale. I have evidence of corruption involving Judge Blackwood and Sheriff McPherson. Land theft, falsified documents, possibly murder." Jenkins' eyes hardened. "Murder?" "The stagecoach wasn't robbed. It was an execution." The old man absorbed this, then nodded once. "Morse is limited. Short message only. What's essential? My name, Elena Costello. I have documents proving corruption. Send help to Jenkins' cabin. McPherson responsible for stagecoach killings." As Jenkins began tapping out the message, the workshop door burst open. Caleb stumbled in, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "They're coming back," he gasped. "All of them." "Finish the message," Caleb urged, securing the workshop door with a heavy workbench. "How many returning?" "At least 4 vehicles. All search operations converging here." He pressed a bandana against his bleeding forehead. "Someone must have found our observer." Jenkins' fingers continued their rhythmic tapping on the brass key, translating their desperate situation into the dots and dashes of a nearly forgotten language. "Message sent," he finally announced. "No guarantee it reached anyone. Equipment's older than most of the trees outside." "It has to be enough," Elena said, helping Caleb to a stool. "You're hurt. Ricochet fragment. Looks worse than it is." Caleb's eyes met Jenkins. "Good to see you, old man." "Likewise, though I'd have preferred better circumstances." Jenkins moved to a cabinet, retrieving a worn first aid kit. "Your father would have chosen a more subtle distraction than blowing up my generator, improvised, with available materials, just like Samuel taught you." A hint of pride colored Jenkins' gruff tone as he handed Elena antiseptic and bandages. Now we need to disappear before McPherson's thugs break down that door. Voices outside grew louder, angry shouts and the slamming of vehicle doors. They had minutes at most before discovery. Options. Caleb asked, wincing as Elena cleaned his wound. Jenkins considered the workshop walls thoughtfully. Depends how much you know about this place. Dad brought me here for poker nights. Workshop, McEbben? Standard layout. Standard visible layout, Jenkins corrected, moving to a large tool cabinet along the back wall. Your father knew about this, but we agreed the fewer people with knowledge, the better. With practice movements, the old man released hidden latches on both sides of the cabinet. The entire unit swung outward like a door, revealing a dark passage descending beneath the workshop floor. Prohibition tunnel, Jenkins explained, retrieving a flashlight from a nearby drawer. Previous owner was a moonshiner, connected to a cave system that runs a quarter-mile to the east side of the property. Eleanor stared at the opening. You're full of surprises, Mr. Jenkins. Survival in these mountains requires contingency planning, young lady. He handed Caleb the flashlight. You'll find emergency supplies at the tunnel exit. Food, water, basic equipment. You're not coming with us? Caleb asked, already guessing the answer. Jenkins shook his head. I'll create confusion, buy you time. Besides, he patted his hip, old bones don't move well through tunnels these days. Heavy pounding shook the workshop door. Jenkins, open up! Sheriff's Department. Go, the old man urged. That evidence needs to reach the right hands. Caleb clasped Jenkins' shoulder. We'll send help. Don't worry about me. Known McPherson too many years for him to risk adding another body to his count. Jenkins' eyes hardened, especially one with friends in the state capital. The pounding intensified, wood splintering around the hinges. One more thing, Jenkins said, reaching beneath a workbench. He produced a sealed waterproof tube. Maps, cave system connects to old mining passages. Could get you all the way to the North Valley if needed. Elena accepted the tube, while Caleb gathered their few possessions. The door shuddered under renewed assault. Thank you, she said, meeting Jenkins' weathered gaze directly. The old man nodded once. Your prosecutor better be worth all this trouble. He is. These mountains deserve justice. Then go get it for them. Jenkins turned toward the door, weapon ready, shoulders square despite his years. I'll handle these badge-wearing trespassers. They descended into the tunnel, Jenkins sealing the entrance behind them. Darkness enveloped them immediately, broken only by the flashlight's narrow beam, illuminating rough stone walls that dripped with moisture. The passage sloped steadily downward, centuries of use having worn smooth depressions in the stone floor. Jenkins will be all right? Elena asked as they navigated the claustrophobic space. If anyone can handle McPherson, it's him. Caleb's tone conveyed more confidence than he felt. State police connections. Too public to disappear without questions. They proceeded in silence for several minutes, the sounds from above fading completely, replaced by their echoing footsteps and the occasional drip of water from unseen sources. The air grew cooler, heavy with mineral scents, and the peculiar stillness of spaces untouched by sunlight. Caleb, Elena ventured after they'd traveled perhaps a quarter-mile. What if the message didn't get through? What if no help comes? He paused, turning to face her in the dim light. Then we complete the mission ourselves. Get you and those documents to Riverdale somehow. And if we can't, there's always another way. My father taught me that, he resumed walking. Sometimes the path isn't clear until you're forced to find it. The tunnel eventually widened into a natural cavern, ceiling disappearing beyond the flashlight's reach. Multiple passages branched outward like stone arteries. Jenkins' maps will guide us now, Caleb said, examining the waterproof tube. These caves connect to half the mountain, used by everyone from Civil War deserters to prohibition runners. Now fugitives with evidence of corruption. History repeats itself. People have always fled to these mountains when the world below became too dangerous. As Caleb unrolled the maps, Elena noticed something unusual. Fresh boot prints in the dust leading into one of the passages. Not years old, not days old. Someone else had recently used these caves. Someone else is down here, Eleanor whispered. Pointing at the fresh boot prints, Caleb immediately extinguished the flashlight, plunging them into absolute darkness. They stood motionless, ears straining for any sound beyond the occasional water drip echoing through the cavern. Multiple sets of prints, Caleb finally murmured, his voice barely audible. Recent, leading deeper into the system, McPherson's men, possibly, or miners. These mountains have always attracted prospectors, legal and otherwise. He reactivated the flashlight, keeping its beam directed downward to minimize visibility from a distance. Examining Jenkins' maps in the dim light, Caleb traced potential routes with his finger. Main exit is here. He indicated a point marked with a faded X. But these prints head toward a different section entirely. Could be an advantage. Whoever made them isn't where we're going. They proceeded cautiously, selecting a passage that veered away from the mysterious footprints. The cave system proved more extensive than either had imagined. A subterranean maze of natural corridors and human-expanded tunnels. Some barely wide enough to squeeze through sideways. After nearly an hour of careful navigation, they reached a small chamber with a stream running along one wall. Caleb called for a rest, both needing to recover strength and reorient using the maps. "How's your head?" Elena asked, examining his bandaged wound in the flashlight's glow. "Better." Bleeding stopped. While Caleb studied the maps, Elena removed her locket, the silver pendant she'd worn since Caleb found her in the snow. Opening its clasp, she extracted not a photograph as he had assumed, but a tightly folded waterproof sleeve containing what appeared to be an ID card. Noticing his attention, Elena hesitated before handing it to him. "There's something you should know. Something I haven't told you." Caleb examined the credential, a press pass with Elena's photograph, identifying her as a journalist for the Denver Chronicle's investigative team. "You're not a legal secretary," he said, expression unreadable. "I was. 3 years ago, before joining the Chronicle." Elena reclaimed the ID, her eyes meeting his directly. "I've been working undercover for 8 months, building a case on judicial corruption across 3 counties. You lied to me. I withheld information. Initially for my protection, later because—" She glanced away. "The fewer people who knew the truth, the safer everyone was." Caleb absorbed this revelation, connecting pieces that suddenly aligned with greater clarity. "The stagecoach. You weren't fleeing randomly. You were bringing your story and evidence to publication." Elena nodded. "The Chronicle has a satellite office in Riverdale. My editor knows to expect the story. Exclusive documentation of how Judge Blackwood and Sheriff McPherson have orchestrated the largest land theft operation in state history." "Why risk yourself? Why not send the documents electronically? Digital files can be questioned in court. Metadata can be manipulated." Elena gestured to her satchel. "Original documents with official seals and signatures are irrefutable, and I needed to verify final details with local property owners who'd been victimized, like my father would have been." "Yes, your cabin was on their acquisition list for next month." She met his gaze steadily. "I didn't anticipate the stagecoach ambush. McPherson must have discovered I'd accessed the records." Caleb returned to studying the maps, his silence conveying the complex emotions churning beneath his stoic exterior. Elena's revelation wasn't merely a matter of withheld information. It fundamentally altered the nature of their partnership. What he'd understood as helping an accidental witness now became aiding a deliberate investigator. "Your story," he finally said, "would expose everything. All the properties, all the officials involved? Completely. The Chronicle has lawyers prepared for the inevitable legal challenges. Once published, state and federal authorities would be forced to investigate, regardless of local corruption. And the people who've already lost land? My neighbors who've been forced out?" Elena's expression softened. "The evidence supports legal action to reverse the fraudulent acquisitions. It won't be immediate, but yes, people could reclaim what was stolen from them." Something shifted in Caleb's demeanor, a renewed sense of purpose beyond mere survival. "Then your story needs to reach publication," he said, returning to the maps with fresh determination. These tunnels should lead us within 5 miles of the North Valley Road. From there we might find transportation to Riverdale. You're not angry about my deception? Caleb considered the question. My father used to say judgment should follow understanding. I understand why you kept your identity secret. He folded the maps decisively. Besides, the truth of your work makes our mission more important, not less. They gathered their supplies, preparing to continue through the tunnels. As Caleb adjusted his pack, a distant sound froze them both, voices echoing through the stone corridors behind them. They've found the tunnel entrance, Elena whispered, and they're following our trail. Caleb quickly consulted the map one final time, memorizing their route. We move fast now. No stops until we reach the exit. As they hurried deeper into the mountain's labyrinth, the echoing voices grew neither louder nor fainter, maintaining a constant, unsettling presence behind them. Pursuers who knew these caves as well as they did, navigating with the confidence of preparation rather than the urgency of flight. The true nature of their situation crystallized with disturbing clarity. This wasn't a spontaneous chase, but a calculated herding. With them moving exactly where someone intended them to go, the tunnels narrowed as they pushed deeper, forcing them to crouch and occasionally crawl through tight passages. Caleb led, consulting Jenkins' maps at each junction, while Elena followed closely behind. The voices echoing from the darkness maintained their spectral presence, neither gaining nor losing ground. They know these caves, Caleb whispered, during a brief pause to reorient. They're pacing us, not chasing us. Herding us somewhere? He nodded grimly. Likely toward a section where they have the advantage, or where others are waiting. The realization altered their strategy immediately. Rather than following the most direct path to the exit marked on Jenkins' map, Caleb began selecting less obvious routes, secondary passages, narrower corridors that showed less frequent use. We need to break their containment pattern, he explained, tracing potential paths. This section here, old mining tunnels from the 1890s, unstable, which is why they're marked with warnings on the map. Unstable meaning dangerous, exactly why our pursuers might avoid them. Caleb met her gaze directly. Risk versus certainty. If we continue on their expected path, we face certain capture, Elena finished. I understand. They diverted into a low, cramped passage that showed no recent traffic. The air grew noticeably staler, thick with mineral dust that coated their throats and lungs. Support timbers, grey with age and spotted with fungus, creaked ominously overhead. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, they emerged into a wider chamber that bore unmistakable signs of its mining history. Rusted tools lay scattered where they'd been abandoned decades ago. Cart tracks, partially buried under fallen rock, led to a collapsed section. Timber frames reinforced walls marred by ancient blast patterns. Gold mine, Caleb observed, examining the rock walls. Small operation by the looks of it. Probably abandoned when the vein played out. Elena approached a crude wooden table where mining implements lay arranged as if their owners had merely stepped away for lunch. A leather-bound ledger, its pages yellow and brittle with age. Recorded final ore measurements from 1907. Beside it stood a device she initially mistook for a bicycle pump, a wooden box with a T-shaped handle protruding from its top. "What's this?" she asked, careful not to touch it. Caleb crossed the chamber, recognition dawning in his eyes. Blasting plunger. Old-style detonator for mining explosives. Does it still work? Doubtful. These haven't been used in a century. He examined it closer. Though the mechanism is simple. Spring-loaded dynamo generates current when the handle is pushed down. The distant voices grew momentarily louder, their pursuers reacting to the discovery that their quarry had veered off the expected path. They've realized we've diverted, Elena whispered. How long before they find us? Minutes, not hours. Caleb scanned the chamber, tactical assessment evident in his gaze. We need to move on, but first, his attention fixed on several wooden crates stacked in a corner. Prying one open revealed cylindrical packages wrapped in waxed paper, each approximately the size of a candle. Dynamite, he breathed. Old but potentially still viable, potentially. Nitroglycerin becomes unstable with age. Could be inert, could be dangerously sensitive. He carefully examined one stick without removing it from the crate. These were stored properly, away from moisture. Might still function as intended. Understanding bloomed in Elena's eyes. You're thinking of causing a collapse. Blocking the tunnel behind us, Caleb nodded. It's a desperate measure. No guarantee of success and significant risk. What kind of risk? Best case, we seal the passage and continue to the exit unimpeded. Worst case, he left the thought unfinished. The blast could trigger a larger collapse than intended. Elena processed this, journalist's instincts weighing variables against alternatives. If we're captured, the evidence never reaches publication. The corruption continues, and McPherson ensures there are no witnesses to his crimes, Caleb added grimly. The decision crystallized between them without further discussion. Caleb carefully extracted 3 dynamite sticks, examining them for leakage or crystallization that would indicate dangerous instability. Finding none, he proceeded to set up a rudimentary blockade at the chamber's entrance passage. The detonator needs to connect to the dynamite, he explained, working with focused efficiency. Mining operations would have used blasting caps and fuses, but we'll improvise, using wire stripped from abandoned equipment and techniques learned from his father's military stories. Caleb created a crude but functional connection between the plunger and the explosives, now wedged into a natural crack in the passage ceiling. "Distance is our friend," he said, unspooling the wire to its maximum length. "We'll be around that bend when detonated, but the rock should provide some protection from the blast wave." The voices grew clearer, distinct words now discernible amid the echoes. Their pursuers had found their trail. Ready? Caleb positioned himself at the detonator, Eleanor beside him, both sheltered behind a rocky outcropping. She nodded, clutching her satchel of evidence that had become worth risking their lives for. "Ready." Caleb took a deep breath, then thrust the plunger downward with all his strength. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. The ancient mechanism seemingly failed. Then the world exploded into chaos. The explosion reverberated through the mountain like a slumbering giant's roar. Stone shrieked against stone as the passage collapsed, dust billowing through the tunnels in choking clouds that left them blind and gasping. The flashlight beam penetrated only inches into the swirling miasma. Caleb pulled Elena deeper into their escape tunnel as secondary collapses followed the initial blast, ominous rumbles that suggested the mountain itself might be coming down around them. "Keep moving," he urged, his voice muffled by the bandana now wrapped across his mouth and nose. Whole system could be destabilizing. They stumbled forward through darkness, periodically illuminated by the flashlight's beam, each step uncertain as the ground beneath them trembled with aftershocks. The explosion had been more powerful than Caleb anticipated, the ancient dynamite apparently retaining its full destructive potential. Despite its age, when they finally reached a section where the dust began to thin, they paused, lungs burning, to assess their situation. Did it work? Elena managed between coughs, wiping grit from her eyes. Caleb directed the flashlight back the way they had come. The tunnel behind them had partially collapsed, massive chunks of ceiling creating a nearly impassable barrier of rubble. More concerning, support timbers along their current passage listed at dangerous angles, stressed by the blast. "It worked too well," he observed grimly. "Sealed their path but destabilized more than I intended. We need to reach the exit quickly. This whole section is compromised." As if to emphasize his point, a distant cracking sound echoed through the tunnel, followed by a muted collapse somewhere behind them. They pressed onward with renewed urgency, navigating by Jenkins' map and Caleb's instinctive understanding of how mining tunnels were typically structured. The path gradually inclined upward, a promising sign they were approaching surface level. "Stop," Elena suddenly whispered, gripping Caleb's arm. "Listen." They froze, straining to hear past their labored breathing. At first, nothing. Then faint but unmistakable, voices ahead. "Impossible," Caleb breathed. "They couldn't have circled around that quickly." "Different group," Elena suggested. You said they were herding us. Maybe toward others waiting at the exit. The realization settled between them with crushing weight. Their desperate gamble with the explosives may have closed one path only to drive them exactly where their pursuers intended. Caleb consulted the map once more, searching for alternatives. There's a secondary passage here. He indicated a thin line branching from their current route, marked as partially collapsed decades ago. Might be impossible, or might be our only option. They backtracked until finding the junction, a narrow fissure in the wall, nearly hidden behind a fallen support beam. Beyond it lay darkness, even more absolute than the main tunnels. "I'll check first," Caleb said, squeezing through the opening. The passage beyond was cramped but navigable, showing signs of old collapse that had been partially cleared by long-gone miners. As the flashlight beam swept the confined space, it illuminated a rusted metal cage hanging from a protruding rock, a miner's canary cage, empty except for dust and the smallest fragments of yellowed bone. "Silent sentinel," Caleb murmured, touching the cage gently. "Still at its post after all these years? What is it?" Elena asked, joining him in the narrow passage. "Canary cage. Miners use them to detect dangerous gases. When the birds stopped singing, time to evacuate," she finished. They proceeded cautiously through the restrictive passage, forced to crawl in sections where cave-ins had left only small openings. The air grew noticeably fresher as they advanced, a promising indication they were approaching an exit distinct from the one on Jenkins' map. After nearly 30 minutes of difficult progress, a different quality of darkness appeared ahead, not the absolute black of the cave system, but the softer darkness of night sky. A small opening, partially concealed by brush and fallen rocks, offered access to the outside world. Caleb emerged first, scanning their surroundings with the caution of a lifetime spent in wilderness. They had exited on the eastern slope of the mountain, stars visible through breaks in the clouds above. No lights, no movement, no sign of human presence. "Clear," he whispered, helping Elena through the narrow exit. The night air felt impossibly sweet after the dusty confines of the tunnels. They stood quietly for a moment, adjusting to the openness of the mountainside after hours underground.
"Where are we?"
Elena asked, orienting herself against the distant peaks silhouetted against the night sky. Caleb studied the landscape, identifying familiar landmarks. Eastern Slope, approximately 3 miles from Jenkins' property. 7 or 8 from the North Valley Road, and from there to Riverdale, 20 miles. But first we need transportation. Elena brushed cave dust from her clothing, determination evident despite her exhaustion. "Then we keep moving." As they prepared to descend the mountain, a pinpoint of light appeared in the valley below, a vehicle moving along a service road, its headlights sweeping the darkness. "McPherson's men?" Elena whispered. "Possibly. Or Forest Service. Or locals." Caleb watched the vehicle's progress. "Either ally or adversary. We need to know which before we approach the road." The light moved methodically, following a pattern that suggested searching rather than traveling, systematic sweeps across the lower mountainside. "They're looking for us," Eleanor concluded. "They must have anticipated we'd exit the caves eventually, and they're between us and the valley road." Caleb's expression hardened with resolve. "We find high ground, observe, identify, then decide our approach." The distant vehicle stopped, its headlights illuminating a small cabin Caleb hadn't expected to find in this isolated section. 4 figures emerged, their movements suggesting military or law enforcement training. "That's not a sheriff's department cabin," Caleb said, unease growing. "That's private property on McPherson's new acquisition list." Elena understood immediately. "They're using stolen land for their operation. Perfect cover. No legal owner to question their presence." The starlight caught the silver flash of a badge as one of the figures gestured toward the mountain, directly toward their position. "Down!" Caleb hissed, pulling Elena behind a granite outcropping as spotlights swept the mountainside. They'd been spotted, or at least their location suspected. The methodical search pattern intensified, lights converging on the eastern slope where they'd emerged from the cave system. "They're boxing us in," Caleb whispered, assessing their dwindling options. Coordinated teams from multiple directions. Eleanor clutched her satchel tighter, the evidence inside representing both their greatest vulnerability and their most important asset. We can't outrun vehicles, and we can't hide indefinitely. No, Caleb agreed grimly. But we can choose where to confront them. He studied their surroundings with the practiced eye of someone raised in these mountains. The slope above offered better defensive positioning, but would eventually leave them trapped against impassable cliffs. Descending meant potentially walking into their pursuers' arms. Lateral movement along the mountainside presented their best option. Difficult terrain that would disadvantage vehicles and force pursuers on foot. Ridge line, he decided, pointing to a rocky spine extending eastward. Follow it 2 miles to Ferguson Creek. Creek leads to Thompson property, more abandoned land. Not yet. Thompson's fighting McPherson's acquisition attempts. Old Vietnam vet who doesn't intimidate easily. They began their desperate traverse, moving as quickly as possible across treacherous terrain made more dangerous by darkness. Below, vehicle lights separated and repositioned, attempting to anticipate their direction. An hour of grueling hiking brought them to a steep ravine carved by spring runoff. Ferguson Creek, now reduced to a trickle by winter's grip. They followed it downward, using the natural depression as concealment from searchers on either side. Thompson's property begins at that fence line, Caleb indicated as they approached a rudimentary boundary marker. He'll have security measures. Likely armed. Will he help us? If he recognizes me as Samuel Turner's son, possibly. If not, Caleb left the implication hanging between them. They crossed onto Thompson property with heightened caution, alert for both pursuers and the property owner's potential defenses. The creek gradually widened as they descended, early morning light now providing sufficient visibility to move without the flashlight. Sharp crack split the dawn silence, a warning shot impacting a tree trunk inches from Caleb's. Position, that's far enough, called a gravelly voice from a concealed position ahead. Private property. Caleb raised his hand slowly. Mr. Thompson, I'm Caleb Turner, Samuel Turner's son. Silence followed this declaration, stretching uncomfortably until a figure emerged from behind a natural blind constructed of branches and canvas. Andrew Thompson stood with the ramrod posture of military bearing despite his 70-plus years. A scoped hunting rifle held with comfortable familiarity. Samuel Turner's boy, he confirmed, studying Caleb with narrowed eyes. Grown some since I saw you last. What brings you to my land with half the county searching for you? Corruption. Land theft? Murder? Caleb lowered his hands cautiously. The same people trying to steal your property killed 3 people on a stagecoach 4 days ago. Thompson's weathered face revealed nothing, but his attention shifted to Eleanor. And you'd be? Elena Costello, Denver Chronicle. She met his evaluating gaze directly. I have documentation of everything McPherson and Judge Blackwood have been doing. Land fraud across 3 counties. I need to reach Riverdale to publish. The old veteran considered this, then nodded once. County's been rotten for years. Tried telling folks, but no one listens to an old man ranting about government overreach. His rifle lowered slightly. McPherson's men have been watching my place for 2 days. Radio chatter picked up about an hour ago. They're excited about something. That would be you two, I reckon. We need transportation to Riverdale, Caleb explained. Once the evidence is published, whoa now. Thompson raised a hand. Getting off my property's one challenge. Reaching Riverdale's something else entirely. They've got checkpoints on every main road. A new voice spoke from behind them. Which is why you'll need help. They spun to find a man in his 40s, wearing hiking gear and a serious expression. A service weapon visible beneath his open jacket. Federal Marshal Daniel Reeves, he introduced himself, producing a badge that caught the morning light. I've been undercover monitoring this situation for 3 months. Elena's journalist instincts flared with suspicion. Convenient timing. Not convenience. Surveillance. Reeves nodded toward Thompson. I've been using Mr. Thompson's property as observation post with his permission. Watched you emerge from the cave system. Figured I'd let you reach relative safety before making contact. How do we know you're legitimate? Caleb demanded. Thompson answered instead of Reeves. Because I vetted him personally when he arrived. Called contacts from my service days to confirm his credentials. He's the real thing, Reeves approached cautiously. Ms. Costello, your editor reached out to the federal prosecutor's office 6 weeks ago regarding your investigation. They assigned me to monitor but not intervene unless absolutely necessary. And now it's necessary? 3 dead civilians, corrupt law enforcement, private mercenaries conducting armed manhunts on U.S. soil? Reeves raised an eyebrow. Yes, I'd say we're well past the observation phase. He produced a satellite phone from his pack. I have extraction resources standing by. We can have you and your evidence in federal custody within 2 hours. Elena exchanged a look with Caleb, hope tempered by wariness born of days on the run. And Caleb? She asked. He's risked everything to help me. Full protection, Reeves assured them. For both of you. And federal investigation into all properties illegally acquired through McPherson and Blackwood's scheme. Thompson had moved to a monitoring position, scanning the surrounding forest with practiced vigilance. Decision time, he announced tersely. McPherson's men are approaching my eastern boundary. 20 minutes, maybe less. Caleb studied the marshal's badge once more, weighing their limited options against the risk of misplaced trust. Make the call, he finally told Reeves. But know this, if you're working with McPherson, you'd better shoot us now. Because otherwise, this evidence reaches publication one way or another. Not working with McPherson, Reeves replied, already dialing his satellite phone. Working to take him down. Along with everyone else involved in this operation, as the marshal requested extraction, Elena gripped Caleb's hand tightly, the first time they had permitted themselves such contact. Almost there, she whispered. Almost done. Spring came to the mountains with its customary defiance of winter's lingering grip. Patches of snow remained in shadowed hollows, but meadows had begun their transformation, early wildflowers pushing through damp earth towards strengthening sunlight. The forest awakened with renewed birdsong and the movement of animals emerging from seasonal dormancy. Caleb stood on the porch of his rebuilt cabin, coffee steam rising in the cool morning air. The structure closely resembled his original home, though certain improvements reflected both necessity and growth. Larger windows, a more efficient layout, stronger foundations. 6 months of work had transformed the charred ruins left by McPherson's men into something both familiar and new. Timber lounged nearby, graying muzzle resting on paws, but eyes alert to every movement in the surrounding forest. The dog had survived McPherson's raid by remaining hidden in the root cellar as instructed, though he'd emerged to a home reduced to smouldering timbers. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor navigating the improved access road, another change from before. Moments later, a Forest Service vehicle appeared through the trees, stopping in the cleared area before the cabin. Elena emerged, dressed practically in jeans and hiking boots, but with an unmistakable urban polish that distinguished her from typical mountain inhabitants. "Journalist right on time," Caleb called, a hint of a smile softening his weathered features. "Must be a professional habit." Elena approached, carrying a package wrapped in protective plastic. "Some habits are worth maintaining, like keeping promises." She joined him on the porch, accepting the offered cup of coffee with familiar ease. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, surveying the mountains that had become central characters in their shared story. "The judge's sentencing is next week," Elena finally said. "Prosecution expects 15 years minimum. McPherson's cooperation only reduced his sentence to 20, not eliminated it. And the properties? Federal court has voided all fraudulent acquisitions. Original owners have first right to reclaim their land at minimal administrative cost." She gestured toward the surrounding forest. "Including this mountain that somehow survived a mysterious fire." Caleb nodded, satisfaction evident despite his customary reserve. Nearly 30 families had begun the process of reclaiming generational properties stolen through corruption. Jenkins had returned to his cabin, refusing offers to relocate despite his age. Thompson had organized a property owners association to prevent similar schemes in the future. "I brought something," Elena said, unwrapping the package to reveal a newspaper preserved in plastic. The Denver Chronicle's front page featured her byline above the headline, "Corruption Exposed. County officials orchestrated largest land theft in state history." "Your Pulitzer submission," Caleb observed. "Our story," she corrected. "I couldn't have written it without you'd have found another mountain." Guide. There aren't many who would face armed pursuers and cave collapses. For a stranger with a suspicious satchel, the memory of those desperate days hung between them. The fear, the trust gradually built. The moments when survival seemed uncertain. Shared experiences that had forged a connection neither had anticipated. Elena traced the frame of the cabin's front door, fingers following the careful inscription Caleb had carved into the threshold, "Turner and the current year." "Your father would be proud," she said quietly, "not just of rebuilding, but of standing against the corruption he once fled." He never truly fled it, Caleb reflected. He just chose to protect what mattered most in the only way he knew how. The investigation had revealed deeper history than either had known. During their ordeal, how Samuel Turner's refusal to participate in McPherson's early corruption had made him a target. How his retreat to the mountain had been strategic rather than defeated. Protection of his son, preservation of Turner land, and patience for justice that would eventually come, though not in his lifetime. "Will you stay?" Elena asked, the question encompassing more than just the immediate moment. Caleb considered the mountains that had shaped him, the solitude that had defined his existence for so long. "This is my home, always will be, even with new neighbors returning to reclaimed properties. Less isolation than before. Change comes whether we welcome it or not. These mountains have seen centuries of it." His gaze met hers directly. "The question is whether certain city journalists might find reason to visit remote cabins occasionally." A smile warmed Elena's expression. "I'm considering a series on mountain conservation. Probably require extensive research trips. First-hand sources, sounds demanding. The best stories usually are. They turn together to watch an eagle soar above the valley, riding thermal currents with effortless grace. Below, the forest continued its patient renewal after winter's harshness, a cycle of resilience as old as the mountains themselves." "I never thanked you," Caleb said quietly, "for bringing justice back to these mountains. And I never thanked you properly," Elena replied, "for showing me what these mountains truly mean, why they're worth protecting." The morning sun strengthened, illuminating the threshold inscription that marked both ending and beginning, a boundary between past and future. Like the season itself balanced between winter's retreat and summer's approach, some boundaries, they had both learned, were worth defending. Others were meant to be crossed.